On the night of March 8, 2014, a plane carrying 239 people said 5 quiet words to the ground below. And then it vanished. There was no distress call, no emergency beacon, no wreckage on radar. It was simply gone. And more than a decade later, even after the most expensive search in aviation history, we still do not know exactly where that plane is. This is the story the world has never been able to close. And the question it has never been able to answer. Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, a scheduled overnight flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. There were 227 passengers and 12 crew members on board. The aircraft was a Boeing 777, one of the most trusted long-haul planes ever built. That night, the flight departed without incident. There were no mechanical warnings. In the pre-flight log, the crew reported no emergency. The weather along the planned route was not unusual. 40 minutes after takeoff, MH370 reached cruising altitude, 40반바정 feet. Then the pilots gave air traffic control one final sign-off. 5 words. Good night, Malaysian 370. And after that, nothing. No further radio contact. No emergency signal. Nothing at all. The aircraft disappeared from civilian radar, from every aviation mystery, but this case was different. Before it, military radar data, analyzed in the days that followed, revealed something extraordinary. MH370 did not simply fall from the sky. It turned. Instead of continuing toward Beijing, the plane made a wide, controlled turn to the west. It crossed back over the Malaysian peninsula. Then it headed south, deep into the southern Indian Ocean. 4 hours, in total silence. Why? That question has never been answered. It was Friday night, March 7 이재민 유삽제, in Kuala Lumpur. For most people, the weekend had just begun. At Gate 7, in Kuala Lumpur International Airport, passengers boarded MH370 as they would any other flight. Bags went into overhead bins. Seats leaned back. Seat belts clicked into place. Among the passengers were Chinese artists returning home from an exhibition in Malaysia. There was a family of 4 traveling to Beijing. There were engineers from an American semiconductor company. There was a retired couple going to visit their grandchildren. In the cockpit were 2 men who had done this many times before. The captain was 53 years old. He had spent 33 years with the airline. He had logged more than 18,000 flight hours by training, by record, and by reputation. He was considered dependable. The first officer was 27. He had only recently been certified on the Boeing 777 for long-haul routes. But by all accounts, he was careful, capable, and promising. The pre-flight checklist was completed without issue. The aircraft, registration 9M MRO, had recently been serviced. No faults were logged. At 12:41 a.m. on March 8, MH370 lifted off runway 22 and climbed into the dark Malaysian sky. For the next 40 minutes, everything was normal. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude. The cabin lights dimmed. Most passengers settled in for the overnight flight. Some were already asleep. In the cockpit, the pilots monitored their instruments. Speed, altitude, fuel load, navigation. Everything was within expected limits. At 1:07 a.m., the aircraft's onboard data link, called ACARS, sent its last scheduled transmission to the ground. The message was simple. All systems normal. 12 minutes later, at 1:19 a.m., came the final voice contact. It was a routine handover from Malaysian airspace to Vietnamese control. Good night, Malaysian 370. 5 words. Calm, correct, unremarkable. And then, silence. At 1:10 a.m., the handover began. Malaysian air traffic control expected Vietnamese control to take over. Vietnamese control expected to hear from the aircraft. Neither side did. For several critical minutes, each side assumed the other had the plane. It was a gap in the system, the kind that should not exist, but sometimes does quietly in the middle of the night. When dozens of aircraft are moving across borders, no single alarm went off. No single person had both the authority and the information to raise the call immediately. At 1:21 a.m., MH370 vanished from civilian radar. No distress code was transmitted. No emergency signal was activated. It was just gone. Civilian radar is like a flashlight in a very large, very dark room. It can only illuminate what is directly in front of it. Once a plane moves beyond the coverage zone, especially over open ocean, it disappears from view. But military radar works differently. And when Malaysian Air Force tracking data was analyzed in the days after the disappearance, it showed something remarkable. MH370 had not simply vanished. It had turned. The flight path changed sharply, deliberately. The aircraft crossed back over the Malaysian peninsula to the west. Then it arced south, deep into the southern Indian Ocean. Whoever, or whatever, made that turn did so with precision. The maneuvers were controlled. The aircraft was not in free fall. Someone or something was still flying it. And for more than 6 hours. After that last radio contact, a satellite operated by a British company continued to receive faint automatic signals from MH370. They were not voices, not messages. They were just technical handshakes, the electronic equivalent of a heartbeat. There were 7 of them over 6 hours. Each one seemed to say, "I'm still here. I am still airborne." Engineers worked through the night to understand what those signals meant. Using the physics of satellite transmission, the timing, the angle, and the Doppler shift, they calculated that MH370 had to be somewhere along a vast arc in the southern Indian Ocean, one of the most remote stretches of ocean on Earth. There were no major shipping lanes, no radar coverage, no listening post, only deep water and silence. At approximately 8:19 a.m. on March 8, roughly 7.5 hours after takeoff, the satellite received one final partial signal from MH370. It was incomplete, as if the aircraft had lost power in the middle of transmission. That was the last contact ever. When word spread that MH370 had not arrived in Beijing, the world's media descended on Kuala Lumpur, but the information being released was fragmented, contradictory, sometimes wrong. In the first days, authorities said the aircraft had disappeared. Over the South China Sea, ships and aircraft were sent there. For 4 days, the search covered the wrong ocean. Then came the military radar data. Then the satellite data.
Confirmed.
And with each new update,
Alert command.
the search zone shifted hundreds of kilometers, then thousands, farther and farther from where the ships already were. Families waiting in Beijing and Kuala Lumpur watched every press conference, and each statement seemed to contradict the one before it. A woman waiting for news of her husband described those early days this way. They said they were searching. They said they were doing everything they could. But every day, the map changed. If you do not know where to search, how can you find anything? And if we do not even know what we are waiting for, how are we supposed to wait? March 17, 7 days after MH370 disappeared, the Malaysian Prime Minister confirmed what the satellite data suggested. The aircraft had deliberately left its planned route. Its communication systems had been turned off manually, and after flying for several more hours, it had ended somewhere in the remote southern Indian Ocean. It was the confirmation no one wanted to hear, because it meant this was probably not a simple mechanical failure. It meant something had happened inside the cockpit, but no one could say what. The search that followed became the largest and most expensive in aviation history. Ships from Australia, China, Malaysia, and other countries swept the ocean. The search area eventually exceeded 협의 저지방 square kilometers, roughly the size of the Korean peninsula. Deep sea search vehicles descended more than 4 kilometers below the surface. They scanned the seafloor piece by piece, but they found nothing. No main wreckage, no black boxes, no answers, only water and silence. In the months that followed, investigators examined every possible explanation. Was it a catastrophic systems failure? Was there a fire that disabled communications before the crew could send a distress signal? It was possible, but the plane kept flying for another 6 hours, and the failure severe enough to shut down communications would usually make that kind of sustained flight very unlikely. Was it a hijacking? All 227 passengers were investigated for known terror links. None were confirmed. No group claimed responsibility. What about decompression? Could cabin pressure have dropped slowly and silently, causing everyone on board to lose consciousness while the aircraft continued on autopilot until it ran out of fuel? Some investigators call this the ghost flight theory. It can explain the silence, but it does not explain the deliberate change in course. And so, one possibility remained, the most uncomfortable one, that someone inside the cockpit chose to change the plane's route deliberately. The official report, released in 2018, concluded that the aircraft's flight path had changed, and that the change was almost certainly made through manual input from the cockpit. But the report stopped there. It did not name a final person responsible. It did not confirm motive. It did not prove criminal intent. The report was 495 pages long, but its central conclusion was simple. We know what the aircraft did. We do not know why it did it. The greatest mystery of the modern aviation era remains officially unsolved. Then the debris began to appear. In July 2015, 16 months after the disappearance, a maintenance worker on Réunion Island, a French territory in the western Indian Ocean, found something washed up on the shore. It was part of an aircraft wing, about 2 meters long, covered in barnacles, clearly shaped by a long time at sea. Stamped into the metal was a part number, 유솔리에데 BB. It was identified as a right-wing flaperon, a movable surface on the wing, and it was confirmed to be from a Boeing 777, specifically from MH370, for families who had waited 16 months for a single piece of physical evidence. This was the first certainty, proof that the plane had gone into the ocean, proof that the people they were waiting for were not coming home. It was confirmation in the cruelest form, and still it was not closure, because the main wreckage was still missing. After that, more fragments washed ashore. Mozambique, Tanzania, South Africa, Madagascar. Some were confirmed, others were considered highly likely to be from MH370. The southern Indian Ocean had carried the broken pieces across thousands of kilometers, slowly, quietly, without explanation. Nature was leaving clues, but the clues only showed where the aircraft had been carried. They still did not tell us where the plane itself came to rest. Aviation does not change because it wants to. It changes when something goes wrong badly enough that the world agrees never again. MH370 changed the rules. Before 2014, there was no international requirement for long-haul aircraft to automatically transmit their position over open ocean. Once a plane left radar coverage, it became in effect invisible. After MH370, the International Civil Aviation Organization required airlines to track aircraft position at least every 15 minutes on long-haul routes. in regions without radar coverage, satellite-based tracking became the standard. Think about what that means. Right now, if you board a long-haul flight across the Pacific or the Indian Ocean, controllers on the ground know where that aircraft is every 15 minutes, automatically, even without a single radio call. That system did not exist before March 8, 2014. MH370 is the reason it does now. And MH370 started another conversation. The aviation world is still having should black boxes be replaced or at least supported by systems that send flight data to the ground in real time, not locked inside a device at the bottom of the ocean, but transmitted by satellite live while the plane is still in the air. If that system had existed on March 8, 20 onward, we still might not have had every answer, but we would know where the plane is. That is the lesson MH370 wrote in the deepest, hardest to reach part of the ocean. And in 2026, a third major search effort is on the way. Autonomous deep-sea drones are scanning a new section of the Indian Ocean floor. The family of 239 people are watching every update. Some of them have been doing that for more than a decade, still waiting in the years. Since MH370 disappeared, the world moved on. New crises, new headlines, new tragedies to mourn, and then gradually to let go. But for the families of those 239 people, there has been no release, because without a confirmed crash site and without a physical place to stand and grieve, there is no real ending. One family member described it this way: if it were a crash, I could accept it. I could say goodbye. But when there is no grave, no final resting place, you are left standing at the arrival's gate forever. Modern aviation gave us the extraordinary power to move hundreds of people across the world in a single night. And we told ourselves that the systems around it, the radar, the satellites, the regulations were enough. MH370 said they were not. It showed us that even in the 21st century, a passenger jet carrying 239 human beings could still vanish from the earth without a trace. And it left us with a question. We are still struggling to answer. How safe? Is it safe enough? And who decides when the answer costs money, when it adds pressure to schedules,
Yes, but
when
we
the
must ensure
plane
it aligns with the
has
lower
never
objective.
crashed before? Who decides then? We remember MH370 not only because it was a tragedy. We remember it because it revealed something we would rather not know. That somewhere between our confidence in technology and the reality of the world beneath us, there are still gaps. And sometimes a plane can disappear into one of them. We remember this story not to frighten, but to learn, so that the next flight and the one after that brings everyone home.